Hello, welcome to this video on AQA GCSE English Language Paper 1. My name is Miss Kilburn-Bond and I work with all the English teachers across the Athelstan Trust. This is the fourth of 5 videos I've made about this same paper. So the focus of this video is actually going to be on question 4. If you're interested in looking at the other questions first and you've not watched those other videos, you might want to go back and see those first. And in all of the videos, the learning objectives are to understand the overall format of the GCSE English Language Paper 1, so you know what it is you're going to be faced with, but also to give you a chance to revise the priorities for each question and develop a strategy that you can apply to each answer. Now, if you've watched the other videos, you'll be familiar with the extract by now. If you haven't, then the extract we're using is actually from a children's picture book. You can see it in front of you now on the screen. So if you haven't seen that, you might want to pause and just read that a couple of times to let it sink in. I'm using a children's picture book because it means I can focus on teaching you the techniques, and it's something sort of simple but well written that we can then use to model from. So don't let that put you off. Okay, so paper 1, section A, on the very last question now of the reading section, this is question 4. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from line 7 to the end. Now, we've talked about this in other videos. If you get a question, you need to read every word in the question because some of the questions on this paper are asking you to only look at one particular section, and you are responsible in question 4 for finding the right section. If you start writing about something that happened in line 3 when this is asking you to do line 7 to the end, then that comment on line 3 is a waste of your time. It's not going to get you those marks. So you really do need to take responsibility and practice being able to find the right section. Put a big box around it or something before you answer the question. I've seen lots of students do that and it works really well. So this is a question where you're always going to be given a quote that comes from another student. A student said, "This part of the story where Sam, the little man, finally reaches the sea shows that his life will be happier now." So this will always be an opinion that's given to you as if it's come from another student. This part of the story where Sam, the little man, finally reaches the sea shows that his life will be happier now. That's an opinion. The question is, to what extent do you agree? Now again, this is not a trick. The exam board are not giving you something that's difficult to agree with. They are giving you something that's nearly always very easy to agree with. And it's absolutely fine for your entire answer to be a list of the reasons why you agree. You do not have to talk about what might make you disagree. You can do. If there is an idea that you want to disagree with, then that's fine, but don't feel like that's something that you have to do to get those 20 marks. So it's a 20-mark question. This is the big reading question, and you need to save yourself 25 minutes to do this. Don't end up rushing this in 10 minutes because it's not going to work. You need 25 minutes to write a longer response than question 1, 2 and 3, so you can show your ability to evaluate and agree with that statement. The bullet points are there to help you. In your response, you could consider your own impressions of Sam's reaction to the sea, evaluate how the sea captain's appearance impacts on Sam's happiness, support your response with references to the text. What you do need to do in this question is you need to do analysis. And this trips people up a little bit because it doesn't really clearly say that in the question, but you are actually meant to be including analysis of how the writer's using language to get this idea across. And hopefully the rest of the video will help you remember to do that. So there we've got the question again for those 20 marks. To what extent do you agree with the student who said this part of the story where Sam finally reaches the sea shows that his life will be happier now? And you'll recognise, if you've watched the other videos, those 3 questions at the bottom that we're going to keep using even in question 4. What is the writer showing us that you agree with? How is the writer showing us this? And why is the writer showing us this? So the only thing that's changed is the inclusion in green of that word agree in the first question. For every point you're going to make, for everything you're going to put under the magnifying glass, which is why that picture of the magnifying glass is there, you're going to pick things that you are agreeing with. Then the same as in question 2, How is the writer showing us this? You're going back to the writer's toolbox. So what techniques is the writer using to show us that idea? And then you're going to go back to reader reaction, the man looking shocked, startled by what he's reading. Why is the writer showing us this? What's the writer trying to do? So here we've got that quote then from the student in the speech bubble, and here you are as a student thinking, to what extent do you agree? Well, what do you do next? You're sitting in the exam, this is that big question, what are you going to do? And like a lot of my advice around this paper is you're going to pick up some highlighters, or you're going to pick up some coloured pencils, or have your own code that you've made up using a pencil. You're going to look for ideas, for evidence that you can use to help you. So everything that's shown in a red or a blue or a purple colour is an example of something that I think agrees with that other student. Everything that's highlighted in those different colours I think is agreeing that Sam, the little man, finally reaching the sea, is showing that his life is going to be happier now. So I've picked out the fact that when he gets to the sea, he can only stare. He hadn't dreamed of the bigness of the sea, he hadn't dreamed of the blueness of it. If I've left something in that black ink, then it means I'm not going to use it for this question. I then looked at the drift and the dream of it, the weave and the wave of it, the fume and the foam of it never left him again. And I've put all of that in red because I think they work like a team. I can look at those ideas together. In a different colour, I found a different idea as to why I agree with the student's quote. I've got in blue the danced hippy hoppy happy hornpipes up and down the beach, and the delighted to be free at last, talking about the little man's clothes. And then in purple, I've again teamed up these two ideas. Thank you, said the little man to the captain, and then the aye aye sir that he says as if he'd been saying it all his life. So first thing I'm doing when I look at the question is picking out which quotes, which phrases I think might help me agree with the student. And once I've got those quotes decided, I'm then able to start thinking about how I'm going to use those three questions along the bottom, those three pictures down, or four pictures down the left hand side, to write my answer. What is the writer showing us? What am I going to put under the magnifying glass that I agree with, that I can put my agreed stamp on? How is the writer showing us this? What has the writer taken out of the toolbox? Have they used a simile, a metaphor, onomatopoeia, repetition? What have they pulled out of their toolbox? And then why is the writer showing us this? What are they wanting us to feel and think when we're reading it? So let's have a look at an example. Through the omniscient third-person narration of Sam's emotional reaction to first seeing the sea, the writer makes it obvious that this is going to be a life-changing moment. So we just pause at the end of that first sentence. You can see some of it's in blue, some in red, some in green, some in purple. And if we relate that to the bottom of the screen, you'll see the word what in red, agree in green, how blue, why purple. And that's to try and get you to start thinking about, when you're answering a question, which parts are you showing? What is it that you're showing the examiner in your answer? And if you colour code your work once you've finished it, it's a really good way of you being able to assess how well you've done that. Sam is speechless and clearly overwhelmed by the beauty of the sea. The little man could only stare. He hadn't dreamed of the bigness of the sea. He hadn't dreamed of the blueness of it. The repetition of he hadn't dreamed makes it impossible not to agree that Sam has found a beauty in the sea that was not possible for him to imagine in his previous life. So there, we've got the how, the repetition with our quote, but in the green, I've explained why I'm agreeing that this is showing us that he's going to be happier in the future. The writer continues to develop this idea, describing Sam's reaction to the rhythmic, alliterative drift and dream, weave and wave, fume and foam as one that never left him again, which affirms to the reader that Sam's life will be different from now on. There is no doubt that this change will be happier and more positive when the writer describes the little man and his mother as dancing hippy hoppy happy hornpipes up and down the beach, which contrasts with Sam's previous trundling journey towards something that didn't excite him. The writer has even personified Sam's clothes as delighted to be free at last, to reinforce to the reader that life is going to be better and less constrained. So every time something's in green, What I'm doing is I'm saying to the examiner, look, here I am, I'm answering your question, I'm thinking about the student's quote and I'm showing that I agree and why I agree with it. So just think about how you're going to show that when you're writing. There is no doubt that the introduction of the rosy sea captain adds to the impression of how life will be happier for Sam, who agrees to be the cabin boy and therefore will spend his future at sea. Sam's reply of "Aye, aye, sir" is described as being said as smartly as if he'd been saying it all his life, and this implies that Sam is finally happy in his own skin and has immediately embraced his new life. So again, if you look at that overall sort of extract from a possible answer, you've got all three colours appearing frequently, and that's suggesting that in this answer you're talking about what the writer's showing us that they agree with, how the writer's showing us this, and why the writer's showing us this. We've got the magnifying glass in action, the agreement stamp, the tools out of the toolkit, and the reader's reaction. And it is that simple. But you need to remember in question 4, it's a 20-mark question, so you need to write more and you need to make sure you're still doing that analysis. It's not okay to just say, yes, I agree with it, because you've got to say how the writer is making you agree with it. And hopefully that's helped remind you of some lessons where you've been taught that question before and given you a really clear strategy that then you can apply to your own answer. Thanks for listening.